The goal of any big government is to increase its power, to increase its reach, and that is exactly what the US has done. They have gone into every sector of the economy, into our lives, and they have basically injected themselves into our personal liberties and taken them away. So they've essentially become a communist society. But it isn't just communism, it isn't just socialism or fascism, it is some sort of collectivism. Call it what you want, but that's exactly what it is. Let's go into some of the big numbers today that are so huge, but of course the mainstream media will not cover it. Record number of Americans not in the labor force in June. You're talking about 92 million people who did not participate in the labor force. That is a record high. You're talking about nearly 1/3 of Americans not in the labor force. Now, what is Obama in this little screenshot at the bottom there talking about? A plan for jobs, middle class security. But the truth is that the middle class is being wiped out. Look at how 1/3 of them are not in there. Now, of course, that doesn't include everybody. Of course, there's senior citizens and there's children and so on and so forth. But doesn't that give you a really interesting look at the numbers? Let's take a look at some more. Hire and pickup aided by rare source of strength, governments. And they're talking about how the surprising lift by the major sector government. And essentially they go on and on in this article, but the point is that the government came to pick up the slack where the private sector will not go. The private sector still has not hired as many employees as they could before because they simply are worried about a recession, and they're also pushed down by the Obamacare law, essentially mandating that everyone gets their Obamacare for their employees unless they're part-time staff. So what do? They are underemploying people where they would normally have full employment before. This skews the employment numbers, of course. And last but not least, hiring temporary workers. Let's go on here. This is the graph. Basically, what I'm trying to say to you is that temporary work is the only type of work that's really expanding in the US. And what does that mean? That individuals have to take on 2 and 3 jobs, and some individuals just simply do not take those jobs because they are really low paying wages. But the fact remains is that that's all that's left. This is something that I talked about in my book, right here in the chapter on unemployment. I said government expansion. The private sector could not afford to hire, so the government stepped in. And the best example being 1.2 million census workers in 2010. And I go on and on. But basically what I'm trying to say is that look at what they're doing. When the private sector can't afford it, the government has to step in to pick up the slack. Where does it get that? Well, it borrows from the future. And of course, these borrowed resources from the future have to come to your doorstep eventually. It all comes down to this: BRICS morphing into an anti-dollar alliance. This is huge, and this is right out of the Voice of Russia, saying that they want to establish an international alliance of countries willing to get rid of the dollar in an international trade and refrain from using dollars in their currency reserves. This would mean the biggest thing to happen since 1971, Nixon pulling the US and then eventually the whole world off the gold standard. And this is it right here. When Russia, China, the rest of the BRICS, they come together and make this kind of deal, this really moves the whole world and makes a big shift, causing major waves in the global economy. Let's take a look at what they said. Now this is right out of their mouth. We're not putting any words in their mouth. Take a look at this. We are discussing with China and our BRICS partners the establishment of a system that of multilateral swaps that will allow the transfer of resources from one country to another if needed. A part of the currency reserves can be directed to the new system. This is huge. This is undoubtedly the most important factor for the collapse of the US dollar. There is no other factor that is more apparent and more obvious to me than the nations choosing to use something else than the US dollar, and here they are going for that. And you don't have a nation that can support itself because it requires other countries to buy up its debt. So you have China buying up the debt at such an alarming rate, and then you look at if that were to stop, if they were to stop buying US dollars, US denominated debt, you're going to have a major collapse that the US can't get itself out of because the currency is being totally manipulated with the way they're doing this, and you have a nation that in every single category is going up further and further into debt. So this has to come to an end. If you like this type of information, you need to be an insider. The insider is where I give out the best intel. It's where I've extended the work I've done in my book, and you can get on there. It's totally free at themoneygps.com. At the bottom, you fill in your email address, and I hope to see you all there.